Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The footsteps outside weren't the usual sound of a neighbor walking their dog. They were heavier, deliberate, like someone with an agenda. Sarah paused by the window, her fingers frozen on the cold glass. The stillness in her chest was unsettling, as though her heart had momentarily stopped, holding its breath. She stared at the figure moving along the fence, its shadow stretching long in the evening light. It wasn't just anyone. It was Karen. Sarah's pulse quickened. Karen. Her neighbor. The one who had no respect for boundaries. The one who thought nothing of showing up uninvited, taking what wasn't hers, and then walking away as if nothing was wrong. But today? Today felt different. The air felt thick with the promise of something new, something bigger than the petty squabbles that had become their daily routine. Sarah could feel it in her gut. Karen had never been a fan of Sarah. In fact, the woman despised her. It started with small things. Comments about Sarah's yard, the way she kept to herself, the way Sarah never joined in with the other neighborhood events. Karen's words had always been sharp, cutting at Sarah's quiet lifestyle, chipping away at the calm that she worked so hard to maintain. But today, as Sarah watched from the window, something had shifted. Sarah couldn't explain it, but she knew it in her bones. This was no longer just about petty jealousy or small disagreements. It was personal. Karen stopped by the rose bushes Sarah had planted a few years ago. She had warned everyone not to get too close to them. The thorns were sharp, and she liked having something in her yard that was just for her. No one had ever dared cross that line before. Not until now. She was moving toward the bushes as if they were her property. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against the window, her fingers trembling. She had always been the one to back down. She had always been the one to quietly go inside when Karen came over, pretending not to notice the other woman's overbearing presence. But that was before. That was the old Sarah. This time, it felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to jump or step back. What did Karen want this time? Sarah's mind raced as she watched Karen's every move. She couldn't see her face clearly through the window, but she could tell by the way she was standing there, hands on her hips, staring down at the rose bushes, that she was up to something. Something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Sarah had been patient. Too patient, maybe. She had tried to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation at all costs. She had always been the one to give in, to apologize, to avoid making waves. But today? She wasn't sure if she could do that anymore. She couldn't ignore the growing sense of anger in her chest, the frustration that had been building for months, maybe even years. It wasn't just about the roses. It wasn't just about Karen trespassing on her property. It was about something deeper, something that had been eating away at her for far too long. Karen didn't even seem to notice that Sarah was watching. Or maybe she did. Maybe she enjoyed it. Sarah couldn't tell anymore. But what she did know was that Karen had crossed a line. She had pushed Sarah to the point where she could no longer stay silent. The quiet, simple woman that everyone thought they knew, she was gone. She had disappeared somewhere along the way, lost in the shadows of the woman Karen had turned her into. But now? Now she was done. She couldn't keep pretending to be the nice neighbor anymore. She couldn't keep pretending to be the one who took the insults, the invasions, the endless disregard for her personal space. Today, something inside her snapped. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the heat rising in her face. The adrenaline surged through her veins. She had to do something. But what? What could she do that would make Karen finally see how wrong she was? The back door creaked, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying the handle. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She jerked away from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to pretend she wasn't home. But the truth was, she couldn't hide anymore. She couldn't run. The time for silence had passed. She turned quickly, scanning the room. She had to act fast. She had to think of something, anything, to stop Karen from crossing the line any further. Her mind raced. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She knew what she had to do. She just didn't know how it would end. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the point was that she didn't have to know how it would end. Maybe the point was that she didn't have to be the one who always gave in, who always cowered, who always let people walk all over her. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she could muster. She glanced back toward the back door. Karen had moved closer now, standing on the other side of the door. Sarah could hear her muttering to herself, probably annoyed at the fact that the door was locked. Sarah reached for the keys on the counter, her fingers gripping the cold metal. Her breath was shallow, her mind still racing, but one thought kept repeating itself over and over again: this was her moment. She knew she had to face Karen, to confront her, to show her that Sarah was no longer the same quiet woman she used to be. With one last glance at the back door, Sarah turned the key in the lock and stepped into the hallway. She took slow, steady steps toward the back door, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. It wasn't just about protecting her property anymore. It was about protecting herself. She couldn't let Karen think she could walk all over her, couldn't let her think she had the power to control her life. Sarah reached the door and pressed her hand against the cold wood. She knew what she had to do. And she was ready. With a deep breath, she opened the door. And there she was. Karen. Karen stood on the other side, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "Well, well," Karen said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who finally decided to show up." Sarah's jaw tightened. She could feel the anger rising within her. It was like a switch had been flipped, and she was no longer the woman who avoided confrontation. She was someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone who wasn't going to let Karen get away with this anymore. "What do you want, Karen?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but firm. Karen raised an eyebrow, her eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and contempt. "I think you know exactly what I want, Sarah. I'm here to take what's mine." Sarah's breath caught. She could feel her body tensing, every nerve on edge. She knew Karen wasn't just talking about the roses anymore. She was talking about something bigger. Something much bigger. And Sarah realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about a backyard. It wasn't even about her. This was about something that would change everything. But what? The door slammed shut behind Sarah, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. Sarah stood in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame tightly. The chill from the cool evening air seeped in, but the heat inside her chest burned through it all. Karen stood there, arms crossed, a smug expression on her face that had become all too familiar. But something in her eyes was different this time. There was no amusement, no hint of her usual confidence. There was something darker there, something that made Sarah's pulse quicken. Karen had crossed the line. And Sarah knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same after tonight. "Do you really think you can just walk onto my property whenever you feel like it?" Sarah's voice was steady, though the tension in her body was almost unbearable. She hadn't meant to sound so calm. In fact, every nerve in her body was screaming for her to do something, anything, but she stood there, facing Karen with a strength she hadn't known she had. Karen sneered. "You think you can just keep me out, Sarah? You're nothing but a quiet little woman, hiding behind your flowers and your fences. But let me tell you something, I don't play by the same rules as everyone else." Sarah's breath caught. This wasn't just about the roses anymore. The words felt like a slap. Karen had always been cruel, but this? This was something else. Something more personal. It was as if she was daring Sarah to stand up to her, daring her to say something, to do something. But Sarah was done being passive. She wasn't that woman anymore. And she wasn't about to let Karen make her feel small, not again. "I've let you walk all over me for too long, Karen," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You've crossed every line, and I've let you. But not anymore." Karen's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You think I'm afraid of you? You think you can scare me into leaving? You've always been weak, Sarah. Quiet. Timid. That's why people walk all over you." Sarah could feel the anger bubbling inside her. Every insult Karen had ever thrown at her, every time the woman had barged into her life uninvited, all of it came rushing to the surface. It was all too much. She couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm not weak," Sarah spat, stepping forward. "I've been patient. I've let you push me around, but you've made a mistake. You've underestimated me. And now, I'm done being the quiet woman who hides in the shadows." Karen's lips curled into a grin. "So, what? You're going to fight me now?" Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "No," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm going to take back what's mine." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, there was silence between them. Sarah stood her ground, watching Karen's every move. She knew this was it, the moment where everything would change. Karen's eyes flickered, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. But it was gone in an instant. "You think you can scare me with your little threats, Sarah? You don't have it in you." Sarah's pulse quickened. Was she right? Was this just empty talk? But before she could second-guess herself, Karen moved. She shoved past Sarah and into the house, her eyes scanning the room like she owned the place. Sarah's breath hitched, but she didn't stop her. She was done letting Karen control her. The woman had gone too far. It wasn't just the trespassing anymore, it was everything. All the time she'd made Sarah feel small, invisible. The constant needling. The way she'd acted like she could take whatever she wanted, when she wanted. Karen had made a mistake coming here today. And Sarah was going to make sure she wouldn't forget it. Karen walked into the living room, her eyes sweeping over the space with disdain. "Nice little house you've got here," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I didn't think you could afford something this nice. You're so quiet. I didn't think you'd have the guts to do anything about anything." Sarah didn't respond. She stood in the doorway, her fists clenched at her sides. The words that had once hurt her, the insults that had once made her shrink back, now felt like nothing more than empty noise. They didn't matter. She was done being afraid. "Do you think you're better than me now?" Karen's voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the silence. She turned to face Sarah, her eyes cold, calculating. "You think you can just kick me out of here? You don't know who you're messing with." "I don't need to know who you are anymore," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I don't need to know anything about you. All I know is that I'm done. I'm done letting you walk all over me. I'm done being afraid." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah didn't feel small. She didn't feel weak. She felt powerful. And it was like a light bulb had clicked on in her mind, illuminating everything that had been wrong for so long. The lies, the manipulation, the constant disrespect. She had let it all slide because she was afraid of confrontation, afraid of being the one to make a scene. But not anymore. Karen's lips twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so tough now? You're just a quiet woman pretending to be something you're not." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not pretending. This is who I am." And you don't get to take that from me. The tension in the room thickened. Karen took a step forward, her gaze never leaving Sarah's. You're nothing, Sarah. You're just some woman hiding behind a fence. You're weak. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you'll always be that weak woman. You'll never be anything more than that. Sarah's blood boiled, her hands trembling with the need to do something, anything, to shut Karen down. But then, in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't going to fight Karen with words anymore. Words weren't enough. She needed to show Karen that she wasn't the same woman anymore. That she didn't have to be afraid. With one swift movement, Sarah turned and walked toward the back door, her steps deliberate. Karen's laughter echoed behind her, but Sarah didn't stop. She had a plan now. She had a way to make Karen regret everything. Sarah reached the back door and threw it open, stepping outside. The air was cold against her skin, but it felt good. It felt real. She turned back to Karen, who had followed her to the door, still sneering. Leave, Sarah said, her voice sharp. Leave now, before I call the police. Karen laughed again, a cruel, mocking sound. Call the police? What are they going to do? They'll just laugh at you, Sarah. You don't have any power. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She didn't care what Karen thought. She didn't care about the lies or the manipulation. She had found her voice, and she was going to use it. You're wrong, Sarah said, her words carrying weight. I do have power. And it's the power to take control of my own life. Something you'll never understand. Karen's expression faltered for the briefest of moments. But then, like a switch had been flipped, her anger flared up again. You think this is over, Sarah? This is just the beginning. For the first time, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Karen was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. But what Karen didn't know was that Sarah had already won. The cold wind brushed against Sarah's cheeks as she stood in her backyard, watching Karen's retreating figure. Karen had left, but she hadn't won. No, not this time. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. The power that Karen had wielded over her for years had evaporated the moment Sarah had stood her ground. But even as Karen's steps faded into the distance, Sarah knew that the fight wasn't over. Karen might have left for now, but she would come back. She always did. And this time, Sarah wasn't going to wait around for her to make the next move. No, she was going to take charge, push back harder than anyone expected, and make sure Karen learned exactly who she was dealing with. As the door slammed shut behind her, Sarah felt a deep, overwhelming sense of resolve. It wasn't just about the backyard anymore. It was about standing up for herself, finally saying enough was enough. For years, she had let Karen invade her life, push her around, make her feel small. But now? Now Sarah had something Karen didn't. She had control. Sarah took a slow, steady breath, trying to calm the adrenaline that still raced through her veins. Her hands were still trembling, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the sheer power of realizing that she had the ability to change her circumstances. That, for the first time, she wasn't the victim. She had the upper hand. The house felt eerily quiet as she walked through the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Her mind was racing. She couldn't just leave things at that, not with Karen. No, Sarah had to make a statement, something that would make it clear this behavior wasn't acceptable anymore. Her first instinct was to call the police. To get an official record of what had happened, to make sure Karen understood the consequences of her actions. But as Sarah stood in the middle of her living room, holding her phone in her hand, she hesitated. She wasn't scared anymore, but the idea of bringing authorities into it felt like a surrender. She had been pushed around for so long, waiting for someone else to make things right. But today, she wasn't going to ask anyone for help. She was going to do this herself. The phone buzzed in her hand, startling her. It was a message from her friend, Emily. "Hey, I heard what happened with Karen. Are you okay? Let me know if you need anything." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to reach out, to tell someone what had happened, but at the same time, she didn't want anyone to pity her. She wasn't the same person anymore. Instead of responding to Emily, Sarah set the phone down on the counter. She was done with the whispers, the pity, and the judgment. This wasn't about anyone else. It was about her. The next few hours were a blur of planning, of decisions that would determine what happened next. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was watching, waiting, plotting her next move. The woman had always been relentless, and this time would be no different. Sarah knew she had to prepare for whatever was coming. Karen had made it clear that she didn't just want to take control of the yard, she wanted to take control of Sarah's life. And Sarah wasn't about to let that happen. As night settled in, Sarah found herself standing in front of her desk, staring at the mess of papers in front of her. She didn't know why she had kept so many things, but the clutter in front of her felt symbolic, representing years of letting her life get out of control, of letting others dictate what she did and how she did it. Not anymore. She pushed the papers aside and reached for the letter opener on her desk, running the edge of the blade along her palm. The cold metal made her shiver, but it also reminded her of the strength she had inside. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt awake. She wasn't going to just sit back and wait for Karen to strike again. No, she was going to act first. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through her contacts until she landed on the number she'd been avoiding for months, the one she knew she had to call. It was her lawyer. "Hi, this is Sarah Thompson," she said, her voice steady. "I need to talk to you about something urgent." The line crackled as she waited for the lawyer to pick up. After a few moments, his voice came through the speaker. "Sarah, how are you? I didn't expect to hear from you today. What's going on?" "I need your help," Sarah said, her words firm, no hesitation in her tone. "I've got a situation with my neighbor, Karen. She's been trespassing, and I'm done letting her get away with it. I need to know what my options are." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Karen, huh? She's been trouble for a while, hasn't she?" "Yeah, and I've let her get away with it," Sarah admitted, a tinge of regret in her voice. "But not anymore. I need to know what I can do to stop her before she takes it any further." The lawyer's voice softened. "I understand. The first thing we need to do is document everything, every time she's crossed the line. You need to keep track of the dates, times, and what exactly happened. If she's making threats or trespassing, that can be grounds for a restraining order." A surge of determination shot through Sarah. She had never thought about getting a restraining order before. It had always felt like an extreme measure, something that only other people did. But this wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about taking back her life. "I can do that," Sarah said, feeling a newfound sense of control. "I'll start keeping track of everything. And if I need to take it further, I will." "Good," the lawyer said, his voice encouraging. "We'll handle this step by step. Don't let her intimidate you." "I won't," Sarah promised, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside her. As she ended the call, a sense of calm washed over her. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this. She had a plan, a strategy. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Sarah started documenting everything: Karen's visits, the damage to her property, the way Karen had ignored her boundaries. She kept a journal, took pictures, and made notes. But even as she gathered her evidence, she knew that wasn't enough. Karen wasn't going to back down easily. The woman was used to getting what she wanted, no matter the cost. That's when Sarah realized she needed to hit Karen where it would hurt the most, her pride. She made a call to the local news station, asking about how to get the word out about a troublesome neighbor. The conversation was casual, almost too casual, but it was all part of the plan. The next morning, an article appeared online: Local woman struggles with unruly neighbor, the battle that's dividing the neighborhood. The piece wasn't groundbreaking, but it made one thing clear: Sarah wasn't going to sit back anymore. She wasn't the quiet, simple woman who let people walk all over her. She was someone who was ready to fight, ready to make sure her story was heard. And as Sarah read the article that morning, she felt a small, but fierce, smile tug at the corners of her lips. It was just the beginning. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of her phone. The article had gone viral. The whole town was talking about it. It felt surreal, like she was reading someone else's life. The woman who had always shied away from conflict was now at the center of a public spectacle. But instead of feeling afraid, instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, Sarah felt empowered. She wasn't the victim anymore. No longer the woman who let people trample over her life without consequence. She was taking control. She was fighting back. She took a deep breath, the weight of what she was about to do settling in. The next step in her plan would test everything. She had done the groundwork, laid the foundation, and now it was time to see if Karen would finally face the consequences for her actions. The phone buzzed again, a message from Emily: "I saw the article. It's everywhere. How are you holding up?" Sarah smiled at the screen before typing her response. "I'm fine. More than fine, actually. I've got a plan in place." As soon as she hit send, there was a knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew it had to be Karen. It was only a matter of time before the woman came back, and now Sarah was ready. She stood up, walking slowly to the door, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for the knob. She opened the door to find Karen standing there, her arms folded across her chest, her expression dark. "I want to know what the hell you think you're doing," Karen spat, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Sarah. "You're making a scene in the whole neighborhood. Everyone's talking about you, and it's not in a good way. What did you think would happen, huh? You think people are going to sympathize with you?" Sarah felt the anger simmering beneath the surface. The woman standing in front of her wasn't the one who had bullied her into silence. No, this woman was different. The woman who had cowered before Karen was gone. "Sympathy?" Sarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for respect. And I'm done letting you disrespect me, Karen. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about standing up for what's right." Karen scoffed, her lip curling into a sneer. "Standing up for what's right? You're a joke, Sarah. You're nothing. Just some quiet woman who's trying to make a name for herself. This won't end well for you, I promise." Sarah stepped back, crossing her arms in front of her chest. "You're right about one thing, Karen. This won't end well for me. But it sure as hell won't end well for you, either." For a moment, there was silence between them. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of years of tension and unresolved animosity. But Sarah didn't break eye contact. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had done the work, prepared herself, and now she had the upper hand. Karen's eyes flickered with uncertainty. For the first time since Sarah could remember, the woman seemed unsure of herself. It was almost as if she didn't know how to respond to Sarah's confidence. "Let me tell you something, Sarah," Karen finally said, her voice low and threatening. "This little game you're playing? It's going to backfire on you. You'll regret it." Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She wasn't going to let Karen's threats intimidate her. "You're right about one thing. I'll never forget this. But I'll be the one who walks away from this with everything intact. Not you. Without waiting for a response, Sarah shut the door, not with force, but with finality. She knew Karen would try to escalate things, to turn the situation around on her terms. But Sarah wasn't going to let her. She had made her decision, and there was no going back now. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Karen seemed to be everywhere, at the grocery store, in the neighborhood, even making snide remarks at the local coffee shop. But Sarah remained calm. She kept her distance, documenting every encounter, every hostile glance. She had already contacted her lawyer again and was preparing for the next step. It wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about making sure Karen couldn't hurt anyone else. The woman's toxic presence had been allowed to linger for far too long, and Sarah wasn't going to be the one to let it continue. Then, one evening, just when Sarah thought things might finally calm down, the phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her stomach dropped. It was Emily. "Sarah, you need to get to the town hall meeting tonight," Emily said, her voice urgent. "Karen's there. She's stirring up trouble again. People are starting to take her side, and she's really pushing for this to escalate." "I'll be there," Sarah said without hesitation. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't let Karen turn the town against her. This was the moment to make her stand. To finish this. The town hall was packed when Sarah arrived, the air thick with tension. She spotted Karen immediately, sitting near the front with a group of people, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her nerves show. She walked up to the front, standing tall and resolute. As soon as she stepped forward, the murmurs died down, and all eyes were on her. Karen's gaze shifted to Sarah, and for the first time, the smug expression on her face faltered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, "I'm here because I've had enough. Enough of being pushed around. Enough of letting people like Karen treat me, and all of you, like we're beneath them. This isn't just about a backyard or a fence. This is about respect. This is about standing up for yourself, no matter how hard it is." There was a moment of silence, and then Emily stood up in the back of the room, giving Sarah a thumbs up. Others joined in, nodding in agreement. Sarah could feel the support in the room, the collective energy of the people who had been afraid to speak out but had found their voice through her. Karen's face twisted in fury. "You're nothing, Sarah. You don't belong here. You've been stirring up trouble for weeks, and now you're making a spectacle of yourself." But Sarah didn't flinch. She had seen this before, the same petty threats, the same desperate need to control. It was all coming apart, and there was nothing Karen could do about it. "I'm making a spectacle of myself?" Sarah asked, her tone biting. "I'm finally standing up for myself, Karen. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to be on the other side of the fence. To be the one who's pushed, threatened, and disrespected. Because this ends now. I'm not afraid of you anymore." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, Karen looked around the room, her confidence cracking. She had always thrived on fear, on the way people cowered before her. But now the tables were turned. Karen's face turned crimson, her hands trembling with rage. "You think this is over, Sarah? This is just the beginning. You'll regret this." But Sarah stood firm. She wasn't the same woman who had once cowered in the face of Karen's cruelty. She wasn't the same woman who had let the insult slide, who had allowed herself to be overlooked and ignored. She had fought for herself, and now, it was time for Karen to face the consequences of her actions. The meeting ended shortly after Sarah's speech, with the mayor promising to address the issues in the coming weeks. But Sarah knew, in that moment, that the victory wasn't about the meeting. It wasn't about anything that would happen in the future. It was about the fact that, for the first time, Karen had been exposed for who she truly was. As Sarah left the hall, she felt a surge of relief flood her chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And no one, not even Karen, could take that away from her. The sun was setting as Sarah walked back home, her steps light, her heart full. She had taken back control of her life. The battle was over. And she had won.